Suppose you were an ordinary working stiff in 1950. You could tell that ordinary working stiff productivity means you're going to be able to buy more stuff for your family. You're going to be able to have a house. You're going to be able to have a car. And that is now entirely false for a majority of Americans.
Productivity is a measure of how much stuff is produced per given unit of input. For measuring the health of the economy, we typically focus on total factor productivity, or the amount produced based on all inputs, and labor productivity, which is the amount produced per person. If productivity grows, so does the economy. However, productivity growth has been falling since the 1970s, with the exception of a brief period in the 1990s. It is especially puzzling that productivity growth has continued to fall even as the internet and other information and communications technologies have spread and seemingly transformed the very definition of work. As Tim Bresnahan, Landau Professor in Technology and the Economy and Professor of Economics at Stanford University explained, if we want working stiffs to be able to buy more stuff for their families, we must figure out how to increase productivity growth. A popular theory is that falling productivity growth is a mirage generated by measurement problems. For example, an iPhone may be counted as a phone, but is clearly more capable and more valuable than a phone 20 years ago. Panelists from our 2016 Aspen Forum panel on innovation, productivity, and growth, however, disagree with that theory. Chad Syverson, J. Baum Harris Professor of Economics at the Booth School of Business, University of Chicago, tells us about his research.
The basic idea, the mismeasurement hypothesis, we'll call it, is that something about technologies that started diffusing at a high rate in the mid-2000s created a lot of social benefit, but did so in a way that didn't show up in the productivity statistics. Let's go look at a bunch of countries. First of all, ask, has productivity slowed down there with the same timing as we've seen in the US? And the answer is yes. 29 out of 30 OECD countries that we have data for had a productivity slowdown that looks like this. But if you go look at this, there is zero relationship between the size of the IT sector in a country and the size of the productivity slowdown that country has experienced.
If the problem were purely measurement, Professor Syverson argues that it would be concentrated in the tech sector, and therefore more likely to exist in countries with relatively larger tech sectors. However, the decline in productivity growth appears to be a global phenomenon, with no correlation between a country's tech sector and the change in productivity growth.
And if you go and look at all those studies, the typical, and update them with the newest numbers, the typical hidden benefit you get is on the order of, let's say, $200 to $300 billion, okay? Well, that sounds like a lot, but the problem is, had productivity growth not dropped to those levels you see lately, but stayed at that higher 95 to 2004 level, we would have $3 trillion more per year in output right now.
Professor Syverson believes that mismeasurement could account for maybe around 1/10 of the overall slowdown we see, and he therefore rejects the mismeasurement hypothesis as the major explainer of the decrease in productivity growth. Carol Corrado, Senior Policy Scholar at the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy and Senior Advisor and Research Director in Economics for the Conference Board, concurs.
Mismeasurement cannot explain the slowdown in output per hour because the slowdown is extremely significant. When you sort of put all these things together, you're looking at the ways in which ICT is used, and the productivity and growth of the sectors that produce particularly the services. It turns out that collectively this sector is poised to contribute 1.4 percentage points per year to productivity growth in the long run. And we're simply not getting that right now. So the bottom line is it's a huge drop in productivity, and I think that mismeasurement could explain 2 to 3/10 of it. That's within the confines of sort of the known unknowns. There's whole issues of how global value chains are accounted for in our statistics, and I think that's the next place that researchers are going in this area.
Dr. Corrado diverges from Professor Syverson, however, by saying that mismeasurement accounts for a more significant portion of the slowdown in productivity growth. but clarifies that the productivity growth we should be seeing if mismeasurement were the sole cause of slowdown is far below what we actually see. John Halterwanger, Distinguished University Professor of Economics at the University of Maryland, agrees that mismeasurement likely isn't the culprit. Instead, he believes a decline in high-growth entrepreneurship may be the direct cause.
The US has been extremely good at moving resources to the most productive business quickly. And so what we've found is, if you decompose the kind of numbers that you're seeing here on the board here, we've got numbers that suggest that roughly 50% of the productivity growth in any given time, but this is going to vary, as I'm going to talk about, is associated with moving resources from less productive to more productive businesses. A small fraction of those firms took off and grew very rapidly. And those high-growth entrepreneurs have had a huge payoff in terms of productivity, in terms of jobs. Why do I think actually it's not a measurement problem? Is right around the time the slowdown that started to occur in the 2000s, we've seen a decline in high-growth entrepreneurship in the United States. So we've seen, including, and this might be a surprise since it's such a tech-oriented audience, including in the high-tech sector. So we actually see less entrepreneurs. And by entrepreneurs, what do I mean? I mean new businesses. When I say there's an entrepreneur, I define it as a business that hires a worker for the first time.
The more interesting question, he posits, is not is productivity growth decreasing, but why is productivity growth decreasing?
The question is why. All right. So first, let's go back to the measurement issue. The fact that this is going on in the data is consistent with there being a real productivity slowdown. Now, so why might this be going on? I think there's a whole variety of reasons. We don't know yet. And I think there's actually evidence to suggest that the US has become more sclerotic, unfortunately, over this period of time.
He intimates that regulations could be the root cause of some economic sclerosis that makes it difficult for resources to be properly allocated to the most successful businesses. Professor Bresnahan believes that measurement error might occur because the incentives of the industries creating most of the raw technical progress make measuring progress difficult.
Most of the places in the rich countries where if you look at a raw technology side, there seems to be a lot of invention, are ones where output is pretty badly measured, and more importantly, where the incentives are terrible.
Industries such as finance, healthcare, and ICT generate lots of raw technical progress. However, it can be hard to measure that progress since most of it has gone into consumption, not production.
You got all this advertising-supported entertainment, very leaky incentives. Advertising supporting is not a way to align technological opportunity with value creation very well. But it's thrown up a lot of technologies that people think are potentially useful more broadly. It's thrown up the mobile devices. It's thrown up the infrastructure that's under the mobile devices. It's thrown up the cloud. It's thrown up the big data infrastructure and the analytics. And all of those technologies are diffusing out of consumption and into production slowly. In 1992, when the servers and PCs were diffusing into the workplace, allowing a dramatically better technological opportunity than the mainframes they were replacing. The earliest adoptions were characterized by obviousness, not by high value. You know, you would get people automating the work of scientists and engineers, which was obviously computation. Big data and analytics got invented they're valuable technologies. They got invented for fairly low value tasks, like what half a cent revenue advertisement are we going to show this person? You know, you just can't say those are super valuable.
That said, Professor Bresnahan also agrees with Professor Halterwanger regarding regulations and policies affecting the ability of businesses to grow in the U.S.
The United States has gone to an enormous effort to make technical progress harder. John talked about the labor market things which make reallocation harder. We've made the small, publicly traded firm nearly impossible to achieve. You know, you want to ask why my neighbors in the venture capital business have changed from folks that wanted to build new companies that revolutionize the world into flippers. They're flippers, right? They're making assets that you can sell to Wall Street. Why did they do that? They did that because of terrible policy changes. These are not just public policy changes, they're also business policy changes that are behind that. We're working really hard to become a country that doesn't get anything new because it's so important to keep what you already have.
We've done our best to ensure the views portrayed here accurately represented what our speakers actually said. As always, the views expressed here are those of the speakers, not necessarily those of TPI.